By the time Ethan Brooks carried the small cardboard box across the polished lobby, the applause from the executive conference room echoed through the glass walls like it belonged to another world. Inside the box sat a framed photograph of his 12-year-old daughter Lily and his 9-year-old son Mason. A faded ceramic mug with the words "World's Okayest Dad" painted in crooked blue letters, and a leather notebook filled with years of customer notes written in his neat handwriting. Behind him, employees crowded around balloons, catered food, and a large banner congratulating the CEO's son on becoming the company's new vice president of sales. Ethan didn't stop to look back. The security guard held the front door open with an awkward smile that seemed to apologize for something he hadn't done, and Ethan nodded politely before stepping into the cool Chicago afternoon. The wind carried the sound of distant traffic as he loaded the box into the trunk of his 12-year-old Honda Accord. He rested both hands on the edge of the trunk for a moment, staring at the reflection of the office tower in the rear window. For years of leading national sales, hundreds of nights spent in airport hotels, birthdays attended through video calls, and weekends sacrificed to help struggling clients had ended with a polite handshake and a farewell packet from Human Resources. He wasn't angry enough to shout, and somehow that hurt even more. 3 years earlier, Ethan had joined Sterling Business Solutions with nothing except determination and 2 children depending entirely on him. His wife, Rebecca, had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him to learn overnight how to braid Lily's hair before school, help Mason with multiplication homework, cook dinners that were edible more often than they were delicious, and somehow still become the dependable employee everyone expected. Every weekday began before sunrise. He packed lunches while coffee brewed, checked backpacks, reminded Mason to tie his shoes properly, and listened patiently while Lily rehearsed speeches for student council elections in the kitchen. After dropping them at school, he drove 45 minutes through heavy traffic into downtown Chicago, where Sterling occupied 3 floors of a sleek office building overlooking the river. Ethan never considered himself naturally gifted at selling. He wasn't loud, flashy, or charismatic. Instead, he remembered birthdays, called clients after installations simply to ask whether everything worked as promised, and never disappeared after a contract was signed. Restaurant owners, hospitals, universities, and manufacturing companies trusted him because he treated every account as though their problems were his own. When an elderly business owner lost refrigeration during a holiday weekend, Ethan spent nearly 12 hours calling suppliers until he found replacement equipment, even though no commission depended on it. When a young entrepreneur couldn't afford the premium package, Ethan redesigned the proposal instead of pushing unnecessary upgrades. Little by little, customers stopped asking for Sterling's sales department and started asking specifically for Ethan Brooks. By the end of his first year, he ranked second in company sales nationwide. During his second year, he finished first. The third year brought another record, followed by a fourth, and each achievement meant braces for Mason, piano lessons for Lily, and enough savings that Ethan no longer lay awake wondering whether one unexpected expense would destroy everything they had rebuilt. His regional director, Diane Foster, often joked that Ethan made honesty look like a competitive advantage, but one rainy October afternoon, after everyone else had left the office, she closed her laptop, looked across the conference table, and quietly said, "When I retire next summer, there's only one person I trust to take this department where it needs to go." Ethan didn't answer immediately because he had learned that hope could become dangerous when spoken aloud. Yet as he drove home beneath the glowing city lights that evening, he allowed himself, for the first time in years, to imagine a future where success finally meant being home in time for dinner instead of chasing the next flight. From that evening forward, Ethan prepared for the opportunity without telling anyone outside his small family. He had learned long ago that celebrating possibilities often made disappointment harder to carry. Instead of talking about the promotion, he quietly earned it one ordinary day at a time. Whenever Diane needed someone to lead Monday strategy meetings, Ethan volunteered. When 2 newly hired sales representatives struggled to keep major accounts, he spent his own lunch breaks coaching them instead of protecting his personal numbers. He built a detailed client retention system that tracked every follow-up call, equipment warranty, and service anniversary, reducing customer cancellations to the lowest level the company had recorded in nearly a decade. More than once he stayed in the office long after sunset preparing reports that technically belonged to senior management because he believed leadership was demonstrated before it was awarded. At home, life continued with its familiar rhythm. Lily had entered middle school and had developed a love for photography, spending weekends capturing sunsets along Lake Michigan with an old camera Ethan had found at a neighborhood thrift store. Mason had become obsessed with baseball and transformed the apartment hallway into an imaginary batting cage, despite repeated reminders that baseballs and apartment walls rarely remained friends for long. Their evenings were simple but precious. Ethan cooked spaghetti that was usually overcooked, helped with homework around the dining table, and insisted on eating together every night they possibly could. Those quiet dinners reminded him why every extra mile driven for work mattered. The promotion would mean fewer business trips, a stable salary instead of depending heavily on commissions, and enough flexibility to attend school concerts without checking airport departure boards. Diane's retirement became official the following spring, and corporate headquarters announced that interviews for the vice president of sales would take place during the first week of May. Ethan spent evenings reviewing leadership plans after the children had fallen asleep, refining ideas for expanding customer relationships without sacrificing the company's reputation for honest service. He entered the interview wearing the same charcoal suit he had purchased years earlier for his wife's memorial service because it remained the nicest thing he owned. The panel asked thoughtful questions about growth, technology, employee retention, and long-term strategy. Ethan answered carefully, drawing from real experiences instead of polished corporate language. When the meeting ended, even the company's chief operating officer shook his hand and thanked him for his preparation. Walking toward the parking garage, Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. It wasn't confidence born from arrogance, but from knowing he had given everything he honestly could. 2 days later, however, Diane knocked softly on the glass wall of his office. She stepped inside, closed the door, and remained standing longer than usual. Her expression said enough before she ever opened her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "The decision wasn't really mine." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. "Who?" he asked, though somehow he already knew. Diane lowered her eyes. "Daniel Whitmore, the CEO's son." Daniel had spent less than 2 years inside the company after working in consulting. He was polished, confident, and well-educated, but he had never managed a national sales force, never built lasting client relationships, and had never experienced the pressure of carrying a territory where every contract determined whether a family could pay next month's bills. Corporate announced the promotion that Friday afternoon with champagne, speeches, and smiling photographs posted across the company's internal network describing Daniel as the next generation of visionary leadership. Ethan read every word in silence before closing the announcement. Around him, co-workers applauded politely, while decorations appeared almost magically throughout the executive floor. No one intended to humiliate him, yet every cheerful laugh felt strangely heavy. He walked into an empty stairwell, sat on the cold concrete steps, and stared at the floor for several minutes. It wasn't simply that he had lost a promotion. It was the realization that years of loyalty, sacrifice, and quiet excellence had never truly been competing against performance at all. They had been competing against a last name he could never have. Ethan returned to his desk that afternoon without saying a single negative word about Daniel or the executives who had made the decision. He answered emails, finalized 2 pending contracts, congratulated a younger salesperson who had reached a personal milestone, and finished every responsibility waiting on his calendar before driving home through unusually heavy traffic. Lily greeted him at the apartment door carrying her camera, excited to show photographs she had taken during an after-school art walk, while Mason immediately asked whether they could practice baseball before sunset. Ethan smiled, admired every picture, tossed baseballs until the streetlights flickered on, and later sat through dinner pretending nothing had changed. Only after both children had gone to bed did he open his laptop at the kitchen table. He wrote a resignation letter, read it twice, and deleted it. The following night he wrote another version, then closed the computer without sending it. For several days he wrestled with the decision, asking himself whether walking away would be irresponsible when 2 young lives depended entirely on his income. But every morning he felt something inside him growing smaller. He realized that if he stayed, he would eventually become the kind of father who brought his frustration home, who answered simple questions with sharp replies, and who taught his children that accepting unfairness forever was somehow the price of stability. On Friday morning, he printed a brief resignation letter and handed it personally to Human Resources. Sterling requested the customary 2-week notice, and Ethan agreed without complaint. Yet by lunchtime, several of his largest clients had already learned the news and begun calling to ask whether they should follow him wherever he went next. Corporate executives grew nervous that customer relationships might unravel if Ethan remained in the office during the transition. Before the workday ended, security politely informed him that management had decided to make his resignation effective immediately. That was how he found himself walking through the lobby carrying a cardboard box, while applause echoed from the conference room where Daniel's promotion celebration continued. During the first few weeks after leaving Sterling, confidence disappeared faster than Ethan expected. He updated his resume, submitted applications to nearly every major business supplier across Illinois and neighboring states, and attended interviews where hiring managers praised his achievements before quietly explaining that the position had already been promised internally or that the offered salary would barely cover his family's rent. Savings that once looked reassuring suddenly seemed frighteningly small. Every grocery trip became a careful exercise in comparing prices, every utility bill a reminder that unemployment measured time differently than regular life. Some nights Ethan lay awake until 3 in the morning calculating how many months they could survive if nothing changed. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, his phone rang. The caller was Maria Delgado, owner of a family-owned restaurant chain Ethan had helped years earlier after a supplier delivered damaged equipment just before Thanksgiving. Sterling had instructed him to let the warranty department handle the complaint, but Ethan had personally spent an entire weekend locating replacement units so Maria wouldn't lose the holiday business that kept her company alive. She had heard through another customer that Ethan no longer worked at Sterling. "I'm opening another location," she told him. "I don't trust anyone else to guide this project. Can you help?" Ethan admitted he no longer represented a large distributor. Maria laughed softly. "That's exactly why I'm calling. I need Ethan, not the company." That first consulting project earned less money than a month's salary at Sterling. But when the check arrived, Ethan placed it on the kitchen table and simply stared at it for several seconds. It wasn't the amount that mattered. It was proof that the relationships he had spent years building belonged not to the corporation that had overlooked him, but to the character he had carried into every conversation, every late-night phone call, and every promise he had refused to break. That single consulting project became another 2 weeks later when Maria introduced Ethan to the owner of a growing retirement community that needed help modernizing its commercial kitchens. Then a hospital administrator remembered how patiently Ethan had solved a complicated equipment failure years earlier and invited him to prepare a proposal. Working from the dining table after the children went to bed, Ethan officially registered Brooks Hospitality Advisors, though the impressive name disguised the reality that the company consisted of one laptop, one aging printer, and a phone that never seemed to ring often enough. The first year tested every ounce of his determination. One customer declared bankruptcy before paying a large invoice. Another delayed construction for 4 months, forcing Ethan to survive on savings he had hoped never to touch. His Honda finally broke down beyond repair on the side of Interstate 90, leaving him no choice but to finance a used cargo van with monthly payments that made him uncomfortable every time he logged into his bank account. Even so, he refused to cut corners. He continued answering client calls personally, often driving hours simply to inspect kitchens before recommending equipment, because he believed people deserved advice based on reality instead of sales quotas. Lily occasionally accompanied him during summer vacation, carrying a camera while photographing completed projects for the company's modest website. Mason proudly declared himself assistant equipment inspector, asking restaurant owners endless questions that usually made everyone laugh. Those trips slowly transformed the business into something that felt less like survival and more like a shared family dream. During the second year, Ethan hired his first employee, Olivia Grant, a former operations coordinator who had lost her position after her employer merged with a national corporation. Olivia possessed an extraordinary talent for organization and an even greater talent for disagreeing with Ethan whenever his generosity threatened the company's finances. She insisted that discounted consulting should remain the exception rather than the rule and redesigned every contract, invoice, and scheduling system until the business finally operated with professional consistency. Ethan often joked that Olivia had saved the company from its overly optimistic founder, though privately he knew the joke contained more truth than exaggeration. By the middle of the third year, Brooks Hospitality Advisors employed 10 people and served restaurants, schools, hotels, and healthcare facilities across 4 states. The office occupied a renovated brick warehouse with large windows, fresh coffee always brewing in the break room, and walls decorated with photographs of completed client projects instead of motivational slogans. Ethan no longer worried every month about making payroll, although he still reviewed expenses carefully and refused unnecessary luxuries. Success arrived gradually, almost quietly, without dramatic headlines or overnight wealth. Then one snowy January morning, an email appeared from Sterling Business Solutions requesting a confidential meeting with CEO Richard Whitmore. Ethan stared at the message for nearly a minute before opening it. During the previous 3 years, Sterling had lost several major national accounts, experienced unusually high turnover within its sales division, and struggled to rebuild customer loyalty after repeated leadership changes. Richard explained only that he wished to discuss a possible partnership. Ethan waited 3 days before replying, not because he wanted revenge, but because he genuinely needed time to decide whether revisiting the place that had broken his confidence would reopen wounds better left closed. Eventually, he agreed to meet at a quiet riverside restaurant overlooking downtown Chicago. Richard arrived early, looking noticeably older than Ethan remembered, with deeper lines around his eyes and a seriousness that had replaced the effortless confidence he once carried into every executive meeting. After a few moments of polite conversation about business conditions and changing markets, Richard folded his hands on the table, looked Ethan directly in the eye, and finally spoke the words Ethan never truly expected to hear. "I made the wrong decision," he admitted softly. "I chose my son because he was my son, and I assumed you would stay anyway." For a long moment, neither man spoke. 3 years earlier, Ethan had imagined this conversation unfolding 100 different ways. In some versions, he walked out without listening. In others, he listed every sacrifice the company had ignored, every late night, every missed school event, every promise that had quietly been broken. Yet sitting across from Richard now, none of those speeches seemed worth giving. The bitterness he had carried after leaving Sterling had slowly dissolved during the years spent building something of his own, replaced by a quieter confidence that no promotion could have provided. Richard slid a folder across the table containing a proposal for Brooks Hospitality Advisors to become Sterling's exclusive consulting partner for hospitality projects throughout the Midwest. The contract represented a significant opportunity, but Ethan closed the folder without reading a single page. "If we work together," he said calmly, "it won't be because you feel guilty. It'll be because both companies can genuinely help our clients." Richard nodded. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." Ethan promised only that he would review the proposal with his leadership team before making any decision. Back at the office, Olivia examined every clause with the determination of a lawyer preparing for trial. Entire sections were rewritten. Performance guarantees were added. Payment schedules became stricter, and every responsibility was clearly defined. Weeks later, after lengthy negotiations, both companies signed an agreement that benefited them equally. Sterling regained credibility with clients who trusted Ethan, while Brooks Hospitality Advisors expanded into markets that would have taken years to reach alone. Several months afterward, Ethan returned to Sterling's headquarters for the first planning session under the new partnership. The building looked almost unchanged, though the atmosphere felt different. Familiar faces greeted him warmly, and younger employees who had never worked beside him introduced themselves with genuine respect. Daniel Whitmore attended the meeting as well. The confidence he had once worn so effortlessly had been replaced by quiet humility earned through difficult experience. As everyone gathered their notes afterward, Daniel approached Ethan near the elevator. "I knew even back then that you deserved the promotion," he admitted. "I should have said something." Ethan studied him for a moment before answering. "Maybe you should have," he replied gently. "But we can't rewrite yesterday." We can only decide what kind of leaders we become tomorrow. The elevator doors opened, and the conversation ended without drama, resentment, or applause. Life continued much as it always had. Lily earned a photography scholarship and often filled the office walls with images from her travels. Mason grew into a confident young man who still loved baseball and occasionally teased his father about the old cargo van he refused to replace. Olivia became an equal partner in the business because Ethan believed loyalty deserved recognition before it turned into quiet disappointment. When Brooks' hospitality advisors eventually needed a new director of client success, Ethan interviewed 6 outstanding candidates. One applicant happened to be a close personal friend who had supported him through difficult years, while another was a talented manager who had been with the company for only 16 months. After reviewing every performance report twice, Ethan promoted the stronger candidate without hesitation. The decision reminded him of the promise he had silently made while carrying that cardboard box out of Sterling years before. If he ever had the power to shape someone else's future, he would never confuse loyalty with favoritism or family ties with earned opportunity. The cardboard box still sat on a shelf in the corner of his office. Inside remained the cracked picture frame, the faded coffee mug, and the worn notebook that had traveled everywhere with him. Visitors sometimes asked why he kept such ordinary things. Ethan always smiled before answering. "Because this box reminds me that the most valuable part of my career was never what I carried out of that building," he would say. "It was everything no one could ever take away: my integrity, the trust one earned one customer at a time, and the choice to become better instead of bitter."